Now, in this last part of the handout, we want to talk about some problem areas, particularly with ambiguity. There are going to be some sentences that are ambiguous in terms of their syntactic or grammatical structure, and these are going to be examples of places where you might wrestle with some ambiguity. So first of all, let's talk about appositional phrases. Appositional phrases. Sometimes sentence structure can be clouded by the presence of apposition, usually nouns in apposition. Nouns are in apposition when two nouns fill the same function slot and then they share the same referent. That is to say, they refer to the same entity. The second noun is the one that's said to be in apposition to the first noun, and it has the semantic function of modifying or qualifying or even recharacterizing the first noun in some way. So for example here, I have Charlie, my brother, kicked the can. Charlie, my brother, kicked the can. Charlie is the subject noun in this sentence. He's the one performing the action, so he's the subject noun. And the noun phrase, my brother, is in apposition to Charlie. So Charlie is the subject. My brother is in apposition. We would call that noun or noun phrase the appositive, okay? And appositive is what is in apposition to another noun. Both of these are trying to fill the subject slot, and both of them refer to the same entity, and thus in this sentence there are not two different subjects of the verb kicked. Rather, there are two noun phrases constituting one subject. The second noun is restating the first one as a way of further explaining or modifying it. Okay? So Charlie and my brother are the same person here. If I were to rephrase this sentence this way, Charlie kicked the can, that is, my brother kicked the can, here we can see that Charlie and my brother are one and the same entity, and that my brother is simply serving to recharacterize Charlie's identity. Now compare the prior sentence with this one. Charlie and my brother kicked the can. Now what's the difference here? In this sentence, Charlie is still the subject noun, right? And my brother is also a subject noun phrase. They're joined, though. They're conjoined or coordinated by the conjunction and, indicating that they form a compound subject of the single verb kicked. Okay? So Charlie and brother are both the subject of kicked. Now, even though Charlie and brother are in the subject slot, do they refer to the same entity here? And the answer is no. They are actually two different people, and this is therefore not an example of apposition. Charlie is one guy, and my brother is another. Now, here's a hint for you. If you see two nouns or two noun phrases that might be in apposition, one test to try is to place the expression namely or who is between the two noun phrases to see if it makes sense. If so, you probably have apposition. For example, Charlie, my brother, kicked the can can be rephrased as Charlie, namely my brother, kicked the can, and Charlie, who is my brother, kicked the can. These rephrasings accurately capture the sense of the first sentence and indicate the presence of an appositional phrase because we understand that sentence to indicate that Charlie and my brother are in fact the same person. On the other hand, just using this test, if I said Charlie, namely, and my brother kicked the can, that wouldn't make any sense. And the reason it doesn't is that this is not an example of apposition. Now, there's some ambiguity between appositional phrases and object complements. So let's talk about that for a moment. Sometimes the structure of a sentence is ambiguous and can be understood to convey two different conceptual situations. One such sentence is this one, Yahweh appointed David the king. This sentence is ambiguous between two possible scenarios here. Number one, The first scenario is that David may already be the king. And what the speaker intends to convey here is that Yahweh has appointed David to some other office besides king, and the king is in apposition to the direct object David, specifying some information about David who has received an appointment. We could rephrase it this way. Yahweh appointed David who was the king. It's a subject, verb, direct object sentence. Yahweh appointed David the king. So this is apposition here. And if we were diagramming this using our Hebrew order, our subject would go here, verb, direct object, and then we will put appositives next to the thing that they are in apposition with and use an equal sign there. Okay, so this diagram is indicating that we only have three obligatory constituents: the subject, the verb, and because the verb is transitive, direct object here. Yahweh appointed David. And in English, we would normally distinguish this by putting a comma here. David the king, or David who is the king. Now, another possible scenario for the sentence is as number 2 says. Perhaps David was not yet the king. Maybe he's still a shepherd boy. And the speaker intends by the sentence then to convey that Yahweh has appointed David to bear the office of king now. David then is the direct object, but the king is not in apposition to David. Rather, the king is the object complement, indicating what the direct object David has become as a result of the appointing activity. It could be rephrased as Yahweh appointed David to be the king. It's a subject, verb, direct object, object complement sentence. And so we would label it this way, SVDOOC, so the king is the object complement, and we would diagram it as follows. Yahweh, subject, and verb appointed, and David is our direct object. But now the king is not in a positive, rather the king is an object complement because we're construing appointed as involving an additional participant role here for the for this noun phrase. It's what the direct object becomes as a result of the appointing. Same sentence, all the same words, but different grammatical structures. What I'm hoping that you can see is that sometimes ambiguity can be semantic, that is, something can just have a different meaning. But sometimes the ambiguity is syntactic. It has to do with the grammar and how the words actually function. And these two sentences look like they're saying the same thing, but when you uncover the underlying grammatical or syntactic structure, they're actually not. They're saying slightly different things. Now in part C here, we have some ambiguity between indirect objects, oppositional phrases, and object complements. Here's another example then of a situation where the structure of a sentence is ambiguous and can be understood to convey three different conceptual situations. I made David a hot dog. I made David a hot dog. This sentence is ambiguous between three possible scenarios. Number 1, perhaps David is already known to be a proverbial hot dog, and that is a slang term for someone who shows off by performing risky stunts. And David's already known to be a hot dog in this way. Perhaps what the speaker intends to convey is that the subject, I, created David, whom everyone considers already to be a hot dog. The noun phrase, a hot dog, is in apposition to the direct object David, specifying some information about the David whom I have made. It could be rephrased as, I made David, who is a hot dog. Okay? I'm all-powerful, and I've made David. And it just so happens that David is a hot dog. This is a subject, verb, direct object type of sentence structure. We've labeled it this way, and the hot dog is the appositive here. So I made David, namely, a hot dog. Now, or I made David, who is a hot dog. Secondly, perhaps hot dog isn't being used in a metaphorical way, but it refers to a real piece of food, and David is the indirect object. He's the beneficiary. The speaker then might be intending to indicate for whom the subject, I, has made this hot dog, and the sentence structure would then be subject, verb, indirect object, and direct object. So I made David a hot dog. The hot dog is what I made. That's the direct object, and I made it for David. And I would diagram all the same words differently here. I made David. David's the direct object up here. But here the hot dog is the direct object, and David serves as the indirect object. And remember, we put the indirect object under the verb, and with that slanting to the right line, and then a baseline and a little bit of an overhang here. Number 3. Finally, perhaps David was not yet a proverbial hot dog. The speaker intends to convey that I somehow turned David into a proverbial hot dog. Perhaps we played truth or dare one too many times. In this sort of a scenario, David is the direct object, and a hot dog is the object complement indicating what the direct object David has become. It could be rephrased as, I made David to be a hot dog. And this is a subject, verb, direct object, object complement type of sentence. So I made David direct object, and what David becomes is a hot dog. I made David be a hot dog. Again, we have our sentence diagram being different than the other two. Subject, verb, direct object, and what the direct object is a hot dog as a result of what I have made David to be. Now, as you can see, there are 3 different scenarios here, and they can all be expressed by the exact same string of words. How you understand the assertion of the sentence depends on how you understand the constituents to function, and determining the sentence type or the sentence typology and drawing a sentence diagram is a helpful tool that can help you, or at least force you, to make those syntactic and interpretive choices. Notice, for example, that the sentence types and the diagrams are different for each of the possible scenarios in the ambiguous sentences above. The sentences have all the same words. They're all in the same order, those words, but they have different diagrams and different sentence types in terms of labeling.